All right. Hi, everybody. It's our CFB Talk 170. It's Tuesday night. This is when we like to talk to you about whatever things you want to discuss in college football. We are in this lull before the bowl season, which won't be here for long. My name is Bobak Ha'Eri. If you want to join the conversation, you can just go ahead and hit request. All right. So, couple of things as we get here. One of the interesting stories that popped up today, and I hope the gentleman's okay, but Ohio State had an unnamed recruiter who was unfortunately carjacked while visiting a recruit in Cleveland. But, quote, he's fine and back recruiting. So that was kind of one of the more squirrely stories of today. Again, I think because, again, the Ohio State unnamed recruiter was unhurt, it's a little bit lighter. But going back to the schedule, here's where it gets fun. So again, this is like the dead zone. I think a lot of folks in sports media will tell you that. And it's like a breather for folks. They start working immediately in August as they go through the season, week after week, game after game. After Army Navy or during the Army Navy week, like we just had, it's kind of a breather for a lot of people in that to kind of get their bearings and get ready for the bowl season and the rush to the college football playoff. Next year, we're not going to have that kind of a break because next year, and I should also point out, this is kind of a weird calendar year. There were 5 Saturdays, or there are going to be 5 Saturdays in December. But next year, after Championship Saturday, the following weekend, Army Navy, and all the portal craziness and the Heisman ceremony, all of that stuff. The following weekend, we get the first round of the 12-team playoff. So Friday, Saturday of next December, I should say the 20th and 21st, 2024, we're going to already be there. It's going to be jumping right into the playoff season. So it'll be an exciting week heading into it. So for college football fans, that means it'll be a little less of a lull this week. And for everyone who covers it, a little bit more work. So I'm looking forward to that next year, especially as we get more teams and more participants. To see John has requested, I'm going to go ahead and let him up. Another interesting thing is one of the Otter stories, although it makes some sense. And if you have theories on this, I'd love to hear it as we wrap up the regular season. Matt Entz, the North Dakota State head coach, has won 2 national championships for the Bison, has announced that, and from what I understand, this got leaked. They were hoping to hold on to this news until after the FCS season wraps up because they're getting ready for the semifinals. But he's going to, after the playoff run, join the USC staff as their linebackers coach. So he's going to join as a position coach, in FBS. But at the same time, some people have been theorizing why. I mean, there's the pay increase. I've been wondering, his defensive coordinator is now the head coach. His defensive coordinator last year left to become defensive coordinator at Northwestern. Northwestern had some off-season implosions, and now he's going to be the head coach. He's named the head coach, and I wonder if he saw that. He saw that increased by that, and he also saw what happened with Choate, who left a successful run over at Montana State to become a co-defensive coordinator and position coach over at Texas. He left to also become head coach at Nevada. So I'm wondering if he's seeing these kinds of FCS routes and decided that, instead of waiting to be a potential G5 head coach or be in the outside run like his predecessor Kleiman, who went to Kansas State, he decided USC was where he was going to go. So that's an interesting move. I know the Bison fans weren't entirely thrilled with him because after Bowl and Kleiman, some people were suggesting that perhaps, his early success, those 2 national championships, were the results of the recruits he got. But I mean, they're going to the semifinals right now, so even the down year for the Bison means it's kind of like down year Alabama. It means like, they might still get to the semifinal regardless. But anyways, enough talking from me. John, what's on your mind?
Hey, how you doing? Can you hear me?
Sure can.
All right, so I guess mine question time is just a little bit of background. Actually regarding the transfer portal. As you know, as a fan of a G5 team, the portal's been a really interesting experience the last couple of years. On one hand, we've probably gotten some of the best talent we've ever got in the history of our program coming into the program. But on the flip side, we have so much so many players coming and going. It gets hard to keep track of everything. I would like to say I'm a huge fan of the portal, though. I mean, I hope they don't change anything. I mean, I think the freedom it gives players, and right now I think it's fantastic. But in what I've observed, though, we do get a lot of players that are coming from the Power Five down to us, then going back to Power Five. So I guess long term. This will make this question a little bit shorter. So are G5 conference teams really almost like the junior college of uh, of teams for players now? Are we just really just like the almost like go the like the community college or junior college of the college football experience at this point?
I don't know if I would necessarily go because JUCOs still exist, and occasionally people do recruit for them. I think I was reading that Deion Sanders building the line that he's doing right now because now he's trying to get offensive linemen. I think he only recruited one traditionally from high school, but he's loaded up from the portal and got a junior college recruit. So those exist, but I think I get what you're saying. It's becoming like a minor league farm team where if you have success at a G5 program, like in your case, Old Dominion, I know that's your team, and some of these others, are you basically just setting yourself up? And I mean, it's an interesting question. I mean, you could also say the same thing for other P5 programs because there's certainly a pecking order that's developing there. And I'm not just talking about the SEC and Big Ten versus the ACC and Big 12, but I mean, even within the conferences to some extent, because some programs can just spend money that the others can't, and perhaps and not only that, but sometimes some programs just have a better history of getting guys into the league, which ultimately for some of these folks, when they realize they're excelling, um, I can kind of get why they want to optimize their worth and their value, and there is some benefit to that. But I think you're right. I think that is absolutely what's developing here, particularly with the G5. But it's fascinating too. One of the questions that's been going on, and I've heard it mentioned by others, but it's something that hit me as well, and I'm sure many of you, is what's going on with the kind of the quarterback situations at, I would say, the top schools. Because obviously, we're hearing Washington and Oregon, because they're obviously going to lose their quarterbacks with the end of the season. They're now looking for transfers. I mean, that was a big thing. Dylan Gabriel's going to be at Oregon now after leaving Oklahoma. Certainly, that was a blue blood leaving to a sort of a newer blue blood, but certainly a program that's been on the rise for some time. And the question is, are we going to see more of that? Are we going to see is to be a top program, or a lot of these like folks, like ones that have turned out great quarterbacks, like USC, like I mean, Michigan seems to be one of the few teams that had a quarterback that isn't a transfer at some point. Is that something that, and Jalen Milroe obviously is not a good example of someone who's stuck with Alabama, but for the rest of it, we're seeing so many of these transfer quarterbacks, and is that something where we're going to see? Will some of the bigger programs spend as much time developing younger ones? I think they will, but it certainly has taken a lot of pressure off of them. But yeah, so when you talk about the G5s, I'm like, yeah, absolutely, it is becoming a little bit of a farm team. Although I do wonder how many of these guys that put their name in the portal will come back. I always love to see that ratio because sometimes I think there are folks that are maybe feeding them information that make them feel like they're, agents, things like that, feeding them information that they're going to be highly desirable when they're not, and then they may end up just kind of coming back, and that happens at all programs. So I think to some extent, you don't know until you put your name out there. So I kind of can't blame them. I mean, I don't know if I think a lot of folks, if they're in that position, if you hear like, somebody might pay you, not if if you're $1 million player, that. I mean, at that point, that would be obvious, and articles would be written about you. But if you're doing really well, and some team is looking for that position, yeah, it never hurts. But yeah, it is complicated like that. John, I'll let you get a reply, and then I see we got a couple people waiting, and I'll get to all of you.
Yeah, I was just going to reply to the fact you mentioned, players just jumping to the portal with the possibility of returning. I think every year, there's always some angry person on Facebook or on Twitter complaining about the number of players jumping into the portal, and really never factoring in like how many guys actually just return to school. I mean, I think there's really no harm in guys just seeing what their worth is on the college football landscape. So I'm happy you did mention that because I think that's something that's really overlooked in the process.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm sure there will be someone who'll break down those stats. James, what's going on? What's on your mind?
Hey, what's going on? Thanks for letting me speak. Just want to say, like, been a big follower of the page through Twitter and through Reddit for a long time. Thanks for making
Yeah, thanks,
following
man.
this
Appreciate that.
little game that I've been playing since I was a kid. Still a big part of my life. But what I wanted to ask is, I grew up on Long Island, New York. We're kind of in a weird spot for college football, right? I went to D3 SUNY Cortland. Shout out Red Dragons. We're in the
Yeah, they're in
D.
the D3 title game against
Yeah.
North Central.
Yep. First time ever. First time ever. Super hyped about that. But I did grow up a Michigan fan.
By the way, real quick, I
Yeah.
just have to ask you: have you been to the Jug game? You've got to have been to the Jug game.
I've been to the Jug game at Yankee Stadium, at MetLife. I've been to it at
Oh,
Cortland. I've been to it.
We actually had a reporter once. We were able to get into the Jug game when it was at MetLife Stadium. Could you explain to those who aren't familiar? Because for those who don't know, this is one of D3's biggest rivalries.
I would say
and
that. I would say that it's probably D3's biggest rivalry. It's the Cortland versus Ithaca game. Play for the Cortica Jug every single year. And basically the two schools really get up for it, right? The two teams have been playing, I think, for about close to, I want to say, 50, like 60, 70 years. And they're about like 20 minutes from each other up in central New York. So, and they blew out the record for the D3 attendance record for a single game over at MetLife. So, like, I would say it was about like 50,000 ish fans that were at the game, which is huge for D3. Like, usually the attendance is like 10K on a good day. For some of the higher
for folks
teams
who might have trouble, like the spelling Cortaca, it's mixing Cortland and Ithaca. So it's just taking the first part of Cortland and the last part of Ithaca. And that's where you got the Cortaca Jug. But sorry, when you mentioned you were there, first of all, I mean, congrats on the D3 title game. That's a huge step for that program.
Right?
But at the same time, like I had I know you wanted to ask about Michigan, but I wanted to notice that because there's so much going on there, and it's rare to talk to D3 fans like this.
Hell yeah. I just wanted to ask, what's like the general consensus on people becoming fans of like teams that they're not necessarily went to the school or from the region? Because I grew up a Michigan fan, obviously. Always wanted to make my patronage over to the big house one day, but what's the general consensus on like you like becoming a fan of a team when you're not necessarily geographically tied to them, or maybe you went to the school? Like, what's the general consensus on that? Maybe I'm looking for approval for me to be a Michigan fan or something like that, but
I think there's different schools of thoughts there. There's different schools of thought. I'm more inclusive than anything. I mean, I'm even like, okay, if everyone wanted to hop on the Colorado bandwagon, great. At the beginning of the season, if you stuck with it, cool. If not, okay, then it is a little shadier. I mean, the whole joke of like, are you an Alabama football fan and a Duke basketball fan, kind of, with a Yankee cap on, as you say, all of that. There's that whole angle of it, but I think, there's a lot of folks, and I've known plenty of folks. I went to USC, so I went to fans who want to be fans of that are interesting. Again, I went there before they were like great. So I remember you'd run into folks who just like their parents went there or their parents were fans. And then, they go to some other school. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, as long as you kind of stick with it, I think to me, sticking with it is really what it ultimately comes down to. Like I remember, for example, for me, I remember there was this guy who went to, it was like a small, liberal arts college in the Midwest. It's a D3 program, but they'd always been a USC fan because their parents were USC fans. I know people who like it for every school. I mean, we know that for every school out there. You talk to people. I mean, our CFB, on the subreddit that we manage, you see folks like that because oftentimes they'll have because we allow for people to have two team logos by their username. And sometimes you'll see like a major team in front or in the second slot, like a Michigan or a Texas and Alabama or any of the FBS programs. And then the second slot will usually be a smaller school that doesn't play D1 football. And that's oftentimes where they actually went. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, you can be, I think really, to me, again, it's consistency. So if you've been a Michigan fan your whole life and you went to, a fine state school in New York, that plays D3 football, there's nothing wrong with that. I think people can be fans of more than one school. I mean, sometimes people go to grad school. Like I have a very good friend and we both kind of traded places. Like he did undergrad at Minnesota and grad school at USC, and I did the reverse. And we're fans of both teams. I mean, when push comes to shove, we pick the team that we're with. And actually both of us, even though he did grad school at USC, he grew up a USC fan. We're push comes to shove, we're USC over Minnesota. But I think as long as you're consistent with it and there's some link, whether you went to the school or you just always liked it, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, we also get folks, my favorite are the posts, and we usually get these on a semi-regular basis. somebody from like Europe, usually they're from Europe or Australia, and they'll say, hey, I'm just getting into American college football. What team should I follow? And, let them pick whoever they want. Figure it out. If you want to be the dude who's like, I'm going to be an Alabama fan right there and then, it's like, all right. But try and stick with it. I mean, don't suddenly become, the team du jour, just because they had a tough game against USF. Don't freak out about it. But John, I see your hand up, and then I'll get some other folks as well. And feel free to stay up, James. And I'm not saying I'm not talking anyone off the stage or anything like that.
Yeah, I was just going to agree fully with you there as well. I think the most important thing as a college football fan is no matter where you're from. If you went to the college or didn't go to the college, I think as long as you stick with the team, for thick and thin, I think that makes you a better fan than anyone in my book personally. And I think a good example of that too is I grew up a Virginia Tech fan, which is because my dad was an alumni, which makes falls between me and him really awkward now. But I think when I was a kid, a lot of the fans that were there were not people who were actually students at any point. They're just people who lived in the Blue Ridge or Appalachian part of Virginia, in that part of the United States, because there is no other team out there. There's no professional team in that part of the state. There's no professional team close to them, and so that they essentially adopted Virginia Tech as their team. So I think no matter what the circumstance is, as long as you support the team through, no matter what whether they're good or bad, I think that matters more than any amount of time you actually spent there as a student or not there as a student.
Yeah, for sure. It's not, and as I always like to say, it's not like a college team is going to move anytime soon. I actually know somebody who bases their fandom on the style of the hoodies, but that might be a bit more. That might be a bit more on the on the edge of it. James, I know you wanted to follow up real quick, and then we'll go over to Beck.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I was a fan through the Rich Rod years and the Brady Hoke years, so those were pretty terrible times to be a fan. So, and I support Michigan basketball and the hockey team as well, and lacrosse team. So it's not like I'm picking Michigan football and Duke basketball or anything. I promise.
No, trust me. I went to USC. Basketball for the longest time was like, yeah, we're in the same city as UCLA. That was kind of the summary of. And we usually lose to Loyola, Marymount, and Pepperdine. They'll usually sucker punch us on occasion. That was being a USC basketball fan for most of my time there. Yeah, and my student years at USC were awful. The highlight of the years I was a student at USC was a loss. The only bowl game was a loss to whack TCU. Not when they were in Mountain West or even in the obviously not in the Big 12 in the Sun Bowl. Which, this is a weird year for the Sun Bowl because I was totally waiting for Lane Kiffin probably not Lane Kiffin, he was already there. Lincoln Riley to end up in the Sun Bowl, only because he would follow Paul Hackett and Lane Kiffin wearing the sombrero of shame, as I nicknamed it, in the photo op they do with the two head coaches wearing these giant sombreros and team colors to welcome them to the Sun Bowl. But at USC, that was always because something went really wrong that season. And no, instead we got a ranked versus ranked team. The first time, I believe, gosh, it's ages, because Oregon State and Notre Dame are both ranked. And with the whole brouhaha with what happened to Florida State, pushing all the ACC bids all over the place, that's how Notre Dame, they didn't expect Notre Dame. Notre Dame ended up being in the Sun Bowl. Although with all the opt-outs, I mean, both quarterbacks are not going to be in the game. In fact, one's going to go to the NFL, I think, one Hartman, and then the other is in the portal. So we'll see what teams actually show up. I actually saw some, real quick, I heard some really interesting analysis I just want to put in the back of your heads, that if you know the history of bowl games, they started as exhibitions to sort of show off areas. So they were always treated as kind of like a bonus after the season, exhibition games. Maybe the players all got wasted the night before, or who knows, but no one took the results seriously. And then by the 60s, they started taking bowl results into consideration. And they weren't at the same time. The AP started taking bowl results into their national championship consideration earlier than the coaches poll. So that's why in 1973, you have a weird result where Alabama is number one in the coaches poll, but Notre Dame, which had just beat Alabama in the bowl game, is number one in the AP poll, because they came out at different times, and that was when their final poll was. So the reason I'm bringing all this up, so bowls originally started as kind of less relevant. The question is now, with all of the shakeups, and I want to credit the person I think I heard this from was Matt Brown at The Athletic. But with all the shakeups with players just opting out of the lower bowls, we're not talking the CFP. I mean, they've kind of gone to a bit of being like an exhibition again, in the sense that, we're not sure quite. We're getting some version of these teams going there, and that one stuck with me. I'll just put that in the back of your heads. But it's kind of a fascinating way to sort of think about bowl season nowadays. But Beck, you've been patient. What's going on?
Hey, thank you. I wanted to talk about the two semifinal games, Bama, Michigan at Rose Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
Coach Saban is 11-1 when you give him more than 3 weeks to prepare. The only loss to Utah in 2011, so over 10 years ago. Coach Saban is great at preparing the team, finding the vulnerabilities when you have time to prepare. What we've seen with Michigan, really the only good win they have is Ohio State. Penn State is always, choking in the big games, so I don't even, want to count that. And Iowa, obviously, with a goose egg there in the championship game. Am I crazy to think that, to me, it is so obvious that Bama is gonna win that game? I mean, I've seen the Jalen Milroe at the SEC championship. I may be a little biased. I'm a Georgia fan, and we got our asses whooped. And Bama seems like they've progressed so much since week one. And Michigan, they beaten everyone, but whoever they beaten, they're not that good, and we've seen it throughout the season. And the second game, Texas is a 4-point favorite. Washington is probably the luckiest team out there. They won so many games by 3 or 2 or 7. Texas likes to live dangerously too. It's going to be probably a shootout, but I feel like Washington's not going to run out here in this final game for them. And what do you think?
Well, those are all, it's fun to kind of analyze this, because I'm still on board with the fact that all 4 teams this year are closer than they have been in previous years. I mean, last year, it felt like TCU just sort of caught lightning in a bottle when they upset Michigan in the semifinal. And then, Cinderella turned back into, everyone is like, they turned back into a pumpkin right in time for Georgia to smash it. But at the same time, these 4 teams, there's arguments for all of them. A part of the thing, and this is where it gets kind of mysterious, because heading into the semifinal, we have teams now coming out of deep from conference play. So so with Alabama, and the problem is with the way the SEC schedules, we didn't get a good read on Alabama outside of the SEC, but we saw that Auburn game, which, again, a lot of concern was raised in that game. But of course, as you said, Saban's great at game planning. So when it came down to the games that was expected, he rose to the challenge. So again, I'm expecting him to come on, and that entire staff to be coming on all cylinders when they get to the Rose Bowl. But with Michigan, again, I think part of the problem is, again, Michigan, that non-conference schedule at the beginning wasn't particularly strong. UNLV, sure, they ended up being a better team than expected. But, with Ohio State, with Penn State, with Iowa towards the end, getting a clear read on Michigan has been a little difficult. At the same time, I think their defense has probably still been exceptional. I don't think we're misreading that. Because we always get concerned when we're looking at Big Ten teams that, wow, these are all great defenses. And then you realize maybe they're all just playing kind of miserable offenses. That's why they look so good. And then you can put them in the bowl season and you see a completely different result. I'm not sure what to make of that. I don't know if I want to say that's happening this season. Similarly, before the season began, the SEC didn't seem all that strong in its non-conference play. So have we kind of let that part go as the teams start getting in the conference play, and the best of that particular conference started to rise to the top, obviously with Alabama and Georgia, followed, oddly enough, unexpectedly this season by Mizzou and perhaps, then LSU and Ole Miss and all of these teams. It's been interesting to see that. So I always get a little nervous that I'm reading too much into the reputation of the SEC, playing that up. And again, I'm curious to see particularly the way the line play goes in this game, because Alabama's defense is strong. And I wonder how it stacks up against the other three defenses that Michigan played, because they also played three other top 10 defenses in Iowa, Penn State, and Ohio State. With Penn State, we saw exactly what they did. They did that incredible decision to, and I don't know how much of this is also Sharon Moore, but they decided to run the ball 32 straight times to finish the game. Ohio State was good at the run, so they started kind of, and they were better at the pass, and the Wolverines managed to kind of scrape out a win. With Iowa again. Iowa's defense gave them some problems, but again, they were able to. The thing with Michigan is they're able to win ugly. So, and their defense is so good it keeps them in the game. So I'm kind of curious to see defense on defenses and how much they control that game and how well, especially the Michigan front seven, which is excellent, can get back there and start to create perhaps a little bit of disruption for Jalen Milroe to put him in a little more of a panic mode. Although he's very good on his feet. I mean, it's so funny. Sometimes you'll see analysis where they're like, well, the Alabama offensive line allowed, all these sacks. I'm like, yeah, they did earlier in the season. And then the kind of, Tommy Rees adjusted the offense. Milroe started to move around, and suddenly the sacks dropped by quite a lot. So I always feel like when people were bringing up the sacks allowed by the Alabama offensive line, it was a little bit deceptive to how they were playing at the beginning of the season versus how they're playing now. And just to jump to the other game, that's the one, going to the Sugar Bowl. Washington, I agree, they're lucky. They're not quite TCU lucky, where they were winning some games by insane fashion last season, but they do feel like they get a lot of luck there, especially based on the skill of Michael Penix Jr. He is by far, of the four quarterbacks, the one who seems to have that ability to make magic happen when it needs to. Like the play where he handed off to Roma Tunze, that was his call in a pivotal moment in the Pac-12 title game, and some of the other throws he's made. I agree with where he fell in the Heisman voting, but at the same time, he certainly had those kinds of moments. And I think going against Texas, he's going to be the reason they win or lose. And I hate saying the quarterback is the reason, is going to make or break a game is sometimes the weak answer. But of all the four teams in the playoff right now, he's the one who I think no, it really is going to fall on him, because the rest of the Washington team is good. It's not bad. They have exceptional receivers, Roma Tunze again, and all. But at the same time, I think Texas is a bit more even. They have probably more depth. We saw what they did to Alabama earlier in the season. Some of the strengths, again, I don't know. Tavondre Sweat and Brian Murphy are just on another league on that defensive line, and their ability to get in and disrupt the way they do. That was why Arizona State was able to challenge Washington. For those who may not remember, or may not have seen the game really late, because it was a really late night game. Arizona State nearly beat Washington, and Washington only won because of a pick six. Like, their offense was getting nothing done against the Sun Devils. And the reason why is they were able to pressure up the middle and disrupt what was going on in the backfield for Washington. That was with Arizona State's talent. And looking at what I'm sure every team that has played Washington since has paid attention to that game. And with the talent Texas has, if they can get that going, and they certainly could with the quality of players they have, that could be a difference for them. Now, again, every coach in this playoff is very competent, so I'm sure they're game planning around it, probably figuring out ways to get things around the edge and kind of probably give up on the center against Texas. But I mean, I'd say of the two games, I'm a little more concerned about how Washington's going to stack up against Texas than I am about how either of the other two teams in the Rose Bowl are going to do. I think those guys are evenly matched, and I could see strong reasons and depth that would give either Michigan or Alabama the strength there. It'll be really curious to see how they go out. Sorry, that was a really kind of broad question, because you're kind of like, how do the semifinals look? I mean, there's a lot going on there.
Yeah. No, that was good. I'll stick with probably Bama winning. Michigan hasn't impressed me on the offense. I think only 3 passes from the QB in the last 3 games. I mean, one pass touchdown.
One guy to look out for when we're looking, by the way, at Michigan, and I should mention this, is just, first of all, they have A.J. Barnard, but they also have Colston Loveland. They're 2 tight ends, and Loveland has really kind of stepped up his game in the second half of the season, and tight ends were the Achilles heel of Alabama when Texas beat them, because the Texas's biggest receiver in that game was Jatavion Sanders. And again, I'm sure Saban isn't an idiot. He probably figured out, they probably worked on how to correct that issue. But that's going to be one interesting kind of matchup, only because it's going to be it's going to be a team that has a very good tight end, and will definitely try to use that to their advantage in an attempt to kind of open up that field. Yep. But let's see. I want to let up RJ. You've been super patient, and after RJ, I'll let up Nate. But again, if you want to talk, just hit request. We'll get you up here. We'll add you to the conversation. It's always good hearing from all of you. RJ, what's going on?
Yo, what's going on? I'm glad we got the important national championship discussion out of the way, so we can talk some G5 now.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, one of the things that honestly has been stuck in my head for the past 24 hours is, with the playoff expanding next year, basically we have completely just said we're pulling the rug out from bowl season. And we're basically saying that, yeah, all the like pomp and, to your point earlier about kind of bowl season used to be a true celebration of football, in the sense of the coaches and players will all go out and get smashed before and then play the most hungover football of their life. And slowly the games have, as the money's come in, the games have mattered more and more, because for a lot of these schools, that paycheck meant something. But one of the things that's been interesting to think about is thinking less about your Sugar Bowls, your Rose Bowls and all that, but kind of your pre-Christmas bowl games, your Bahamas Bowl, your, Rip the Beef O'Brady's Bowl. But, those type of bowls were huge for a lot of like mid-tier G5 programs, because that's part of like kept their athletic departments afloat. Was, we're going to go win 6 games, we're going to go to a bowl, and that's going to give us a cash flow of like 4 to 5 years in these athletics programs, particularly football. So one of the things I'm curious about is just, as we project out into 5 years, like, how many of these G5 programs we kind of think about, like we love our Maction, we love our Sun Belt. People stay up late watching Hawaii games. How many of them are, particularly the private or lesser state funded ones, are going to see like not just like hits to the quality of football, but these schools might actually lose football or lose other sports that are critical to them because the playoff expanded to 12 teams. Not to say, oh, they lost it because they had a shot at the playoff but didn't make it, but because we've expanded to 12 teams, now these X amount of games matter and these ones don't. And things like the Sun Bowl that used to be fun because, oh, cool, Lincoln Riley, you just had a year. Or, Josh Heupel turned into a pumpkin again. You're going to another bowl game that we don't care about. Those type of bowl games now are completely irrelevant. Not to say that people cared about them a whole lot before, but the money that used to be behind them is no longer going to be there, because all that money is going to go towards how can we get sponsorships to these extended playoff games. So just as we think about kind of the future of G5, and particularly a lot of these coaching moves where people are leaving, right now we're seeing an FCS, but how close are we to seeing G5 head coaches leave schools to take non-coordinator, non-head coach positions at not even P4, P5, whatever we call it now, but take like your linebackers coach, your wide receivers coach at a lower playoff school, just because the money isn't there, not just to like, have a fighting chance, but the money isn't even there to sustain a program. That's one of the things that I know is really a hard question to touch on, because we're combining a whole bunch of things we don't know, but just one of the unspoken elements of expansion that I'm curious to see you guys' thoughts on.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of good elements to that. And the first thing that struck me was, oh, by the way, before I mention it, and only because I have to just give a quick shout out to Steve Spurrier, because when I saw that Tennessee was going to the Citrus Bowl, his infamous quote was, "You can't spell Citrus Bowl without UT," as kind of a dig at the Tennessee rivalry. But seeing them there was kind of funny. But again, it's a better bowl than most. So again, it's a New Year's Day bowl for the record. But going back to I think the G5 bowl thing is an interesting question. I think the question is, will they still pay out the way they do? Because that's ultimately what's going to be the value to keeping those bowls around and keeping the G5 teams, and frankly, any team going to these bowls. Because that was one of the ways they would incentivize teams to come visit, Pasadena, or come visit, back in the day when bowls were kind of a new thing. And even as these new bowls were added, you have to incentivize the teams, especially the FBS programs, because no one wants to really lose money. And sometimes if it's a close deal, maybe they figure, okay, if we generate some excitement, we might get some more donations, etc. But historically, particularly before, I would say, the bigger proliferation of bowls in the last 20 years, there were teams that would turn down bowls for various reasons. I remember when UCLA turned down what we know as the Potato Bowl, because it was just going to be too costly to ship the team up to Boise, and they just didn't see the net benefit for the program. They decided not to move forward with it. So you'd see situations like that. You'd see occasionally teams turn down bowls, but now there's so many bowls, and the opportunity to get the extra, I think, practice days is sort of moved beyond that. But in a lot of ways, it's also the payouts, and to some extent, it has to do with distance. I mean, certainly at this point, even though the bowls may not be as important for a lot of programs, I think they still have a lot of value, if any, for the ability to practice, the ability to kind of finish up strong, maybe get if you've lost some players to the portal or players who have decided to opt out, you can still get reps with younger players, and it's above board. You can get that extra experience. From what I understand, that extra practice session has sort of increased the value of it, and kind of, especially, a lot of coaches want that. But there's also good matchups too. I mean, we certainly, without a doubt, and some teams are extremely excited to be there. I mean, Jacksonville State was not qualified originally to go bowling, but because there were short bowl teams, they get to go as an 8-4 team to the New Orleans Bowl, their first ever bowl game as an FBS program. That's going to be exciting for them. And when you think about the way a lot of the bowls actually select their teams, not just in conference championships, but once you get beyond them, you start to pick them based on who you think will put butts in seats. Now, I want to qualify. There's a chunk of bowls that were created by ESPN to create TV content, because as long as people will still watch them on TV, they'll still get that kind of money, and that money gets paid to the teams, paid sometimes to the teams directly, sometimes to the conferences to be distributed to the teams. There's some kind of, I don't know all the contracts perfectly well. I do freely admit that. So there are those games as well. I mean, there's plenty of those. I mean, gosh, with the Camellia Bowl, it's so funny too. When we were doing some investigation on bowls, you find out a lot of them are just run by, I don't know if they still call it that, but it's a division called ESPN Events, and they were the ones that were kind of arranging these bowl games. They're the ones that were kind of being added on the edges.
I'm pretty sure that still exists, because I think I've seen them doing some others.
Exactly. And I should say they exist, but I wasn't sure if they kept the same name. And the thing is, that's all they do. They create content for television. And when they want to, of course, you want to put the more ones that are still kind of independently run, like the Independence Bowl, coincidentally, they do care about putting butts in seats, because, they still have their original mission, which is trying to get people to go to Shreveport, and see how wonderful it is. I'm not trying to be ironic, but and then sometimes they get stuck with Cal, which
I was about to say, that is 100% true, everything you said. And also, I'm now imagining UC Berkeley students in Shreveport, Louisiana.
Yeah, there aren't going to be too many of them. That was one of Larry Scott's great moments, when he announced that the Pac-12 was adding a new bowl game, and it was the Independence Bowl, and everyone was like, "Wait, what?" The Pac-12 and Shreveport are nowhere near each other, and you're trying to get. I mean, there was a whole level of that. But that's one of Larry Scott's specialities, and we all know how that all turned out. But overall, I think, going back to just the solvency, and because you brought up also just sort of the general solvency of G5 programs, it's going to be curious to see how things work out with, we saw the Charlie Baker proposal that came out last week, the idea of creating what most people had expected, some level of new division for the very top teams, and how many of those teams can make it up there. It's a way to kind of save a lot of the other programs in a weird way, because if some of these lawsuits that are currently filed go the way they probably will, it's going to create some level of, now I know the NCAA wants to not call them employees, but something very close to an employee relationship, where they have to put in revenue and spend a lot more on the players. And while, Michigan, UCLA to some extent, and Alabama can afford that, it's going to be impossible especially because you have to remember the NCAA has D2, D3. These programs can't possibly do that. So the idea of just separating them off into their own zone might insulate some of these other programs, because certainly a lot of the G5 programs can't do that. They simply can't. It would potentially bankrupt programs, and or at the very least, we'd see severe drops in so many of the other sports for a lot of reasons, including they also have to maintain Title IX. So you have to keep around some women's sports, but that might be at the expense of a lot of other programs, or just the bare minimum of what it could take to keep the one moneymaker or two moneymakers, if you include basketball, moving. There's a lot going on in that question, so I'm going to kind of wrap it slightly there, just because I want to allow some of the other folks who are here to join us on stage. But it's a great question, and in the next few years, it's going to be fascinating to see how, because if you really want to go more macro here, the process of cord cutting, the process of how people consume sports media has changed a lot. And when we were looking at these new TV contracts, the ones that caused the Big Ten and the SEC to move even beyond the others, as well as the kind of disintegration of the Pac-12, one of the things that was coming up when the Pac-12, before it disintegrated, when the Pac-12 deals were kind of being discussed, people were wondering what's going to happen in about 10 years, or whenever they have to start renegotiating. And if demographic shifts in TV viewership change the way they do, especially with, I should say, the method in how people watch TV, it's not clear that the same TV deals can be made. And it was kind of interesting, too, because if you all remember, Apple and Amazon were discussed for the Pac-12, but Apple was one of the primary ones. And that model, it was interesting to hear some of the analysis. The money wasn't quite there compared to normal terrestrial TV, but a lot of folks were like, realistically, though, next time we probably look at TV contracts, that's going to be where a lot of the money's coming from. Maybe they'll be able to up the offer to make it more competitive. But if we see cable numbers going the way they are, and people move to streaming, that's going to actually have another bigger question, all of it. And if that money pool shrinks, then suddenly these bowls start to have an interesting question mark around them. Suddenly, all of these programs that are counting on these TV payouts are going to have a lot more of a question around them. The top of the programs will probably still be okay, but you then have to look towards the back and towards the G5 and where they go. But that's a huge question, and apologize for the rambling answer, but there's a lot going on there. But thank you for asking that one.
No, all good. Thank you for breaking it down, because there's definitely a whole lot to talk about for things we don't know yet.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, RJ. I really appreciate you joining us. So, Nate, what's going on? How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm really disappointed I missed last week with all the playoff chaos and my Longhorns got in, but I'm sure it was a riveting discussion, and I hope there was some controversy and arguments in here.
Oh my goodness, you would not believe it. Yeah. It was actually real fun. We for the heck of it, I on the Sunday night, as soon as as the ACC title game went final, I opened a space just to see, and boy, did people want to talk. And I don't think at any point any of us seriously fathomed that the four teams were going to be selected the way they were. But c'est la vie. But what's on your mind?
I saw that you had that talk come up. I was actually at the Big 12 championship game, and it was a long weekend, and I was probably passed out on the couch by 7 p.m. But anyways, the question I had was, I want to know from you, what are some of the bowl games you're looking forward to for different reasons? And so I'm going to start with, first, no New Year's Six or playoff games. So what's the bowl game you're looking forward to watch the most? That's just pure, just like going to be a good game, good football. Second, what's the one you're most looking forward to? Where I always love the bowl game where it's like, these guys have got nothing to lose. Like, they're going for two every time, trick plays left and right. It's 40-40, in the third quarter. It's just fun backyard football. And then third, what's going to be just a weird bowl game, whether it's just, why are these two teams playing each other, or the coach that's going to do something weird, or I don't know, just just something interesting is going to happen, through it or at the end of it. I want to hear those three from you.
Boy, and I might ask you to remind me the categories, but the one that's got me probably the most excited for just the pure football, even though it's going to be missing one of the two quarterbacks, is the Alma Bowl with Arizona against Oklahoma, because there's still a lot of excitement there. And I know Oklahoma's excited about the other quarterbacks they have, and what we've seen with Arizona has been absolutely fascinating after they changed, obviously, the quarterback, and just how they've been playing with Noah Fafita has made them an exciting program that, they're, for those who know, they lost 3 times. Two of them were in overtime. Second game of the season, at Mississippi State, and that was before they figured out, they had a star in the making with Nova Fida. And then in triple overtime, the USC, and then the third loss was still a decently close loss to Washington, which is in the playoffs. So that's an extremely strong team. Oklahoma, obviously, was the one Texas loss, and has also put up some good games for the most part. They had a couple of, obviously they dropped another, and they've had some issues here and there, but I think to just watch those two square off from pure football, that one I like a lot. In terms of just kind of fun stories, I'm kind of hyped for the New Mexico Bowl because New Mexico State's going to be there, and for those who know, they're not like it's not in Albuquerque, they're in Las Cruces, but just to watch them go back to back bowl games, to see what Kill has done over there. And Fresno State's interesting too, because they were one of the teams that seemed before the season had one of the shots at reaching the G5 spot in the New Year's Six. Then something just sort of weird happened to them. I'm not sure what, but so those of you who may have noticed, because they lost a close one at Wyoming when it seemed like it was going to be either Wyoming or Air Force or Fresno State winning the Mountain West. And then obviously the Mountain West turned into a UNLV versus Boise State fight. But setting that aside, something just kind of broke at Fresno State in the last 3 games because they dropped at San Jose State. The New Mexico game really made no sense because New Mexico has been a pretty miserable program overall, and they just dumped their coach. And then they lost at San Diego State and sent Brady Hoke out a winner. But at the end of the season, Jeff Tedford announces that he's taking a medical leave. It sounds like he's medically retiring. They've got an interim now. So I'm wondering now how much of that kind of messy end to their season was that. And something perhaps going on off the, I'm very curious. I'm sure maybe the Fresno Bee or one of the papers there will write about that, but I'm kind of curious to see how that game works out only for the 2 teams and their individual stories. Now, the one where, gosh, what's the one where I don't know what to even make of it? And I don't know how that, this is a tough one because I immediately want to go to some of the oddball teams that were sent in places that don't make sense. How can you imagine SMU? They were supposed to, if they had managed to beat Tulane, they would have been they did beat Tulane. So, excuse what I just said. They should have been, to some people, in the New Year's Six. Instead, after beating Tulane, they get bypassed by undefeated Liberty, despite the schedule of Liberty. And again, Liberty's an exciting program. They've got Caden Salter. They've got a lot of good program. They've got a good program. They've got good talent. They just had an unfortunately weak schedule for the way Conference USA turned out and their non-conference schedule. So despite getting to 11-2, they get sent to Fenway, and they're going to be playing on December 28th against a hometown Boston College. 6-6. It's a weird matchup, and it's a future conference game. So next season they'll be conference mates. But that one to me is probably the oddest pairing, only because to see SMU get so close to the New Year's Six and then get sent to Boston, which again, probably because they're from Dallas. If it were another cold weather team, I would be less. I mean, it's also funny, just a quick shout out to Miami being sent to the Pinstripe Bowl on the same day, almost at the same time, to face hometown Rutgers, so to speak, if you consider Rutgers a New York team. Both those teams, man, they got sent out to them, extremely different climates for what is not typically what you expect for a bowl season celebration. Nate, I see your hand up, and then I'll get to Mac.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for that response. I want to ask one more. I'm going to break my rule because I am actually curious. I'm sure you guys probably talked about it last week, but what's going to happen with the Florida State Georgia game? And because after everything that went down, I saw one of the pictures of when they were doing the Orange Bowl interview, and it just seemed like both Norvell and Kirby Smart were just not happy of how things ended up. So, both teams are definitely playing for, well, I mean, I think and hope they're going to be playing for some pride. So is that going to be a weird one, or is that just going to be hopefully a good game because both teams want to prove something?
I hope it's a good game. I don't know what we're going to get. I don't know who's going to be playing for Georgia, and that kind of goes back to the whole situation. We're going to get a version of each of these teams. Florida State certainly has more to play for because they're still trying to play in a way. I mean, things would have to go wildly chaotic in those semifinals and the final for them to have a shot to necessarily split the title. I don't think that would happen, only because the quality of the games in the semifinals is very good, and whoever comes out of both of those is going to have a very strong argument and probably convince most of the press. But I'm sure there will also be people, just like with UCF in the 2017-18 season, who will give them a championship if they manage to beat Georgia. But still, Georgia is a strong team. Florida State's defense is exceptional. I was not entirely impressed by what we saw from Rodemaker against Florida, but he's better than Brock Glenn. So I'm curious to see. There's so much mystery to that game and how those teams are going to treat it, just like any bowl season that isn't the semifinal, that I guess we'll just have to unfortunately wait and see. I hope it's a great game. It should be. It's certainly by far, hands down, out of the semifinal, the most interesting game. But I didn't mention it for the reasons you said. You didn't want to talk about the New Year's Six.
I'm curious if Georgia ends up losing, if Kirby Smart's going to pull up the excuse our players didn't want to be here, like what was it, the 2018-2019 Sugar Bowl against Texas? That comment really kind of irked some of us Texas fans. So
I can imagine that. Hey, RJ, I see your hand up. I'll let you have a quick word, and then Mac, love to hear from you.
Yeah, I'll be quick. Just going back to bowl games with propensity to get real stupid. The Duke's Mayo Bowl does PR better than anyone, but UNC West Virginia, very high likelihood both those teams are like, oh, we've got to play defense again. And even without Drake May, that can get really dumb really quickly. Because if you look at both of these opponents' points allowed opponent points scored numbers, it looks like 2 sevens, and then the numbers get really high really quickly. So I would pay attention to that one, because that could be a 50-49 overtime type of game.
Oh, I hope so. That would be so fun, because West Virginia is a team that did a lot better than they expected. North Carolina fell short of what they expected, and they're both 8-4. And I agree. The Charlotte Sports Foundation, which runs the Duke's Mayo Bowl, formerly the Belk Bowl, is phenomenal. I'm on pretty good terms with the guy who helps run their social media, the one who most people know because don't know him by name, but Miller Yoho is the reason why their Twitter account's always been so hilarious. And love that guy. Love the work they do there. And the Mayo dunk was hilarious when they did it. And they wanted to do it, I believe, earlier than they did. It took so much negotiation because the NFL team did not want any Mayo to actually touch the field itself. So that's why it's done off the field over concrete. They told me the negotiation process was just ridiculous to get that Mayo dump to actually happen. So just wanted to mention that. Mac, what's going on? Thank you for your patience.
Oh, you guys, welcome up. How's everyone doing?
Great.
So I did have a idea for the non-playoff bowl games. I was thinking maybe along the lines we get rid of the bowl tie-ins and then just have 2 tiers. Maybe one tier where you have 6 to 8 wins, and then the other tier of 9+ wins. And then like on that Sunday after they draw the names for the playoff, just randomly select them like bingo.
That's neat, but I can tell you a lot of the bowl games would be really angered because, what if you get a team that's going to have to travel in that like 6-loss, probably the 6-win category, however you want to cut it, has to get sent across the nation. Because I think there is so much weird politicking that happens with bowl games, and it's fascinating. We got a little slice of it only because the ACC had to really quickly change all of their plans beforehand, which again is why Louisville found themselves playing a USC team that isn't going to have Caleb Williams on it, in the Holiday Bowl. I forgot where they were originally going to go. Like there was a lot of interesting reporting there, but it's a fun idea. It is a real fun idea to imagine that. Like, I would almost want them not even like bingo. I'd want like a Wheel of Fortune or like I used to live in California growing up. They used to do the Big Spin, which is if you won the lottery, like some version of the California lottery, there'd be a show where literally you just see somebody like it would be like the big money wheel on Price is Right, except sideways. But just roll that, and then you'd see like the horror coming over a coach's face when they realize where they have to go. There's a lot of potential there for just being totally wacky, although not sure how much it would. I think there would be a bit of a revolt with fans and coaches and coaches probably wouldn't care, but fans and the bowl hosts would probably be the most annoyed by that because you could really set up some sparsely attended games.
I mean, you can always trade between the bowls as well.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, make it like some sort of big. Can you imagine? It just turns into some really weird nationwide trading system with all the, because there's so many teams now. There's like 82 spots. You're gonna have all the, you're gonna have tiers of this. You're gonna have like 20 teams trading among themselves, try and come up with the best solution and who can go where. Oh, that could be really entertaining, though. Can you imagine that? Some team's going to be angry. Some team's going to be happy. Maybe some coach is just better at negotiating, or some AD is better at negotiating than others. Make those ADs earn their paychecks as though raising money constantly isn't part of what they do. But make them have one more stupid step in their job.
And hey, if you and your rival haven't played during the regular season, you two automatically play in a bowl game.
That would be, could you imagine? That's like a way to force like Bedlam back together again. It's like, oh, you guys both made balls, so we're going to just pair you two up. Sorry, you get no choice in it. You guys just get to choose where you play. We're going to play Bedlam in Yankee Stadium. Gosh, dare to dream. I now want to see that happen. I want to see like just some unexpected rivalry reemerge in Fenway Park. And just some place that just doesn't make any sense. Let's do that. Let's figure out a way to make it happen. Hey Nate, I see your hand up. Did you want to add something to this?
Yeah, I like the whole trading thought, but do it like Dirty Santa style. So like you can like steal like the bowl, like trade it with another team, but you only get one of those. So like you trade your way to like getting to go to the Bahamas, but then like Toledo comes and steals it away from you. I think that'd be fun.
And here's where it gets funny, because there was a quirk in the BCS ages ago that I think most of the Bulls either forgot it was in their contract or what, because this is before they kind of rejiggered and added a fifth BCS game to have a title game separate from the four major Bulls that were in it. And it came in 2002. And I forgot exactly how because the Rose Bowl was going to host the national championship. So the Pac-12 team didn't necessarily go there. It was something like that. And I apologize. Pardon me. Wazoo made the Pac-12 title game. So they were going to be, or there wasn't a title game, but the Pac-12 championship. So they got to play in the Rose Bowl. So there was a question of who they were going to play. Ohio State went to the national championship, so they were going to have an open spot. They were planning to select Iowa, because Iowa was also going to be in one of the top four bowls. And suddenly, the Orange Bowl pulled a contract stipulation that said once every 4 years, or once, it was, you think even longer than that, any of those bowls could pick twice in a row. So they picked USC, which they were expected to do, and then they immediately picked Iowa, which completely angered the Rose Bowl. So you ended up with USC, Iowa in the Orange Bowl, and it was the first time, it's happened since, but it was the first time the Heisman winner and the Heisman runner-up were on opposite sides of the field, like right after the award ceremony, because it was Carson Palmer on one side, and I think it was Brad Banks. I forgot his name, but he was this great quarterback at Iowa. And so they got to play in a really heated Orange Bowl. And to be fair, this was not Oklahoma's fault. So Oklahoma ended up going to the Rose Bowl that year, and they were able to fill their slot. By all accounts, and Wazoo fans get very defensive about this, that was a Rose Bowl where they weren't able to sell it entirely out. And the onus always seems to point towards Wazoo not being able to sell their section of the stadium, which, again, the Rose Bowl of all things, like that's not a very common trip for a lot of programs, especially when the Pac-10 and the Pac-12 were around. But yeah, that was one of those rare times where we had a bowl decide to pull basically that kind of a bad Santa move and just dirty Santa move and just yank it from the Rose Bowl, which, the Rose Bowl, for those who don't know, they are the stodgiest of the stodgy, the most serious of the serious. They're the whole reason, and they are the reason why we ended up with a 14 playoff rather than a 16 playoff. They wanted to keep their spot very open, and they were only willing to negotiate with the other bowls to create the playoff if they could protect their status. And that was one of the main reasons why we ended up with four teams, which for the most part, kind of, other than that first year with the whole Baylor TCU situation, and this exact year and its final year, had more or less worked out. But just wanted to throw that out there. Let's see here. I'm going to let up Ski Mask Smurfy. Thank you all for your patience. It's always great talking to you. But Ski Mask Murphy, what's on your mind?
Throughout the course of this, but I just wanted your opinion on sort of how long do you think it is before the rest of the bowl season collapses under the playoff, especially considering that I guess ESPN sort of holds the contracts to all of it currently, and if they might see the rest of the bowl season as disposable?
I mean, it's an interesting question. I don't know if it's there are it isn't necessarily there's like I think a handful that aren't ESPN, but yeah, most of them are. But I don't think they're going to necessarily collapse. I think it's a matter of will the market support it? Will they? If as long as people keep watching these games, they're going to still pay for them because I mean, what's their alternative? I mean, that I kind of get on in my own mind on ESPN because there's some other interesting stuff out there that they could broadcast and like again, I'm going to nerd out. I get into the fact that there's college football in places like Japan and they play it at. You think the Hawaii test is bad? Try the Kobe or Osaka test where it goes until like 4 a.m. I'm like, why doesn't ESPN just pay them a teensy bit of money and put those games on in the middle of the night? Because what else are they broadcasting at like 3 a.m? So, as long as they can get people to watch it, as long as people are still tuning in, I think the sign that's going to be the most ominous for the minor bowl games would be if we started to see a real dip in TV viewership. On the positive side, by all accounts, across every network, I mean, not just ESPN, but across, CBS, across Fox, TV viewership for college football is the strongest it's ever been. And that is a huge, huge deal because that means if that continues with the bowl games, even the minor bowl games, people just want to watch some good college football, maybe not good college football, but college football in general, that means money will come in. So as long as the money keeps flowing in that direction, it'll be good. If kind of going to the more ominous view I had, if this whole cable TV payment model can't find a sufficient replacement and there is a lesser pool of money to go around, when we get to the TV negotiations, when we get to, well, how much are these bowls actually going to pay out? That will be when we'll start to perhaps see either lower bowl payouts or some of the bowls just ceasing to exist. But at this point, I don't know if I'm necessarily ready to jump on the doom and gloom because I think people will just watch some of these games for the entertainment, maybe the sickos entertainment of it, or just the something to put on the background around the holidays because a lot of these bowls, for the most part, are clustered around the holidays when you're kind of sitting at home, perhaps with family, and you're just looking for something to watch. I mean, it's the whole Egg Bowl thing. I mean, Egg Bowl, it's going to be an ugly game. It's going to be wild. And it's going to be on Thanksgiving, and you can watch it. But it's a legit question. I mean, I don't know. Is there a reason Scheme asks Murphy? Because I mean, obviously you're not the first one to say this, but what's got you concerned about it?
Well, it's just because during the course of college, I had it come up a few different times as far as research projects, and that I did see that basically once the 14 playoff started, basically it's been sort of like a slow grind of the TV viewership of the bowl games, just slowly progressing down outside of really the New Year's Six, just slowly going down in terms of millions of views, which is a lot of cable cutting, but also in terms of like the Nielsen share rating. They've all been slowly going down, and I just think it may not be sustainable. And also just because knowing like recently someone put out like a financial information and like ESPN is really Disney's whole like moneymaker, and they may get shrewd and just what's the guy's name, Bob Iger, and they may just be shrewd and say, oh, these bowl games aren't for us because I mean it's going to be 2 seasons, and I think with these 2 seasons we'll see how it works out. Because if there's not any viewership, people may lose and just be like, these games really don't matter. And we got like, 8 games that really do matter. We're going to watch those in December versus these. I don't know how much longer it's going to last.
It is a good concern. And then you kind of got me thinking too, because clearly ESPN and other broadcasters have found money in putting, some of these minor games during the season on just wild nights like Tuesday, Wednesday. And there is some way they're able to clearly the numbers work for them. Just putting that game on at night. Granted, it's a conference game anyway, so the teams are happy. They're going to have to play the game anyway. They were happy to move it just to get the TV exposure, probably at some reasonable deal that allows, they can say to the recruits, hey, you're going to be on a primetime game, even if it is on a Tuesday or a Wednesday night. But with these bowl games, I mean, again, I'd be curious to see. And you brought up something interesting too, because after I had a friend who worked at one of the major sponsors of bowl games. They don't sponsor bowl games anymore, but they were a major sponsor that had sponsored a number of high-end bowls. And they were able to move up in the pecking order after the playoffs were created because suddenly the price for sponsorship of the non-playoff bowls had actually dropped a little bit. They'd been devalued. And that was immediate. That was actually before they'd even played any of the games. So that was an interesting effect. And I guess maybe that was also just sort of, they projected what they were going to do. But again, I agree with you. Right. It'll be interesting to see if this. I'm very curious to see if this rise in TV viewership over the season, how that translates into bowl season with the minor bowls. Not the the CFP matchups are so good that I expect this to be a banner year for them. Maybe not that first year was off the chart because I think people were the novelty of it was just exciting, and then they nearly blew it all up by having the stupid idea of the next year putting the semifinals on New Year's Eve in the evening. Like, oh yeah, people are totally going to give up. That was crazy.
That was one of the worst college football decisions almost ever.
They sounded so stupid when they were trying to sell that one. And I remember they hired all those people, like they hired Jimmy Kimmel, they hired all these like big names to try and sell people on it. It's like, no one's going to do that. Are you crazy? Like that's like, you might as well, there's very few things can succeed there, and that they certainly weren't going to. But I think it's an interesting point. I'm very curious to see. I think that now you've got me super curious to see how the playoff ranking, how the minor bowl TV rankings are going to look, especially the Nielsen shares after this month. John, you wanted to come back up. I'm going to slowly start wrapping this up, but I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah. Well, first things first. I know CMask and others were talking about viewership and bowl games. I would say, man, never underestimate the sickos of college football, including myself. I mean, just the same sport where people are watching, spring football and watching the combine, just watching dudes work out for NFL teams. I mean, the fact that gets put on NFL Network and national, and, for everyone to watch every year, I think really speaks to the fact of how much free time sickos in the sport has. So that's one thing I'm honestly not worried about. I did have a quick two-part question for you. First being, what game this Saturday are you most excited for? And the second being, if there's one bowl game you would never want to be sent to as a player, which one would it be and why?
I guess, and I mentioned earlier the New Mexico Bowl got me interested. So I am curious to see how New Mexico State does, because the idea of going to 11 wins, I don't know if they've ever done that before. It might have been ancient times when New Mexico State won that far. So I'm a big fan of Jerry Kill. I'm curious to see how they go, but it's actually a good slate of bowls altogether. I mean, I already mentioned Jacksonville State getting to play in their first bowl, in the New Orleans Bowl and the Superdome. That's always good. Here's a fun one. I don't necessarily know how much I'm going to watch it, but I'm probably going to have to make a graphic I'm going to tweet out later, because the LA Bowl has one of the quirkiest things I've ever seen. So for those who may not be familiar with geography in Los Angeles really well, or just familiar, UCLA does not play anywhere near their campus. UCLA actually plays in the Rose Bowl. Historically, they actually started playing college football in the LA Coliseum, which is right next to USC, roughly, let's say, 10 miles away. So they for until roughly 1982, they've shared the LA Coliseum, which was kind of a funny situation. So the LA Coliseum would have to alternate who is playing home games there. And then when they would play, that's why they were two of the teams that had historically originated the home-on-home colors scheme, because they shared the same stadium. Then in 1982, 83, they decided to move to the Rose Bowl. The Rose Bowl historically had only been used for the Rose Bowl game. Financially, that was getting harder for them to maintain the stadium and just use that situation. So UCLA was looking for a new home, their own dedicated home, so they started playing their games there. The problem is that's like 20 miles away from the UCLA campus, and with LA traffic, that's a horrible drive. Now, the LA Bowl, just like last year's national championship, is in SoFi Stadium, that brand new stadium they built. NFL, it's an awesome venue in Inglewood, not far from LAX. That is by far closer to UCLA than their own home stadium. It's closer to UCLA than the Coliseum. So we're going to have a really quirky situation where UCLA is going to be playing at the closest location to their campus that they probably ever have, against Boise State, which is the Mountain West champion. So that'll be a fun one. But, if that doesn't get UCLA fans to show up to a bowl game, I don't know what will, because most of them live on the West Side, and it'll be an exciting one to see. So I'm kind of curious to see that one, and how that pans out. Let's see. RJ, I saw your hand up. What's up?
Yeah, just jumping in with a quick note. I don't know how many UCLA fans will show up because UCLA semester starts. They run the quarter system, so they are notorious for not starting until late January. So most of them are going to be at home.
Well, maybe they're students, but I mean, imagine the fan base. Only because so many of them live on the West Side. That I was mostly
Well, that's
thinking
fair.
the
I guess
bowls are more for.
the LA base of UCLA
Yeah.
fans that have been there, done that. I think that's a fair.
Yeah, no, I kind of agree. I'm a little skeptical on it myself, only because I grew up in LA and UCLA fans, they have a hard time showing up even when the team was doing good, especially last season in the Coliseum. John, you wanted to add something, or did I accidentally leave something off?
Yeah, I was just kind of curious of what bowl game you think sucks.
Oh, where you don't want to be sent. I mean, I got to be honest. The idea of playing in New York, I'm not against, but man, being sent there for your bowl game to play outdoors, Boston's probably a close second, but I don't know. Maybe it's kind of a tie between those two. But getting sent to play outdoors in a cold place just seems kind of not, because again, the Quick Lane Bowl, fine. It's in Detroit, but it's indoors. And I love it because it's Minnesota versus Bowling Green. Bowling Green embarrassed Minnesota a couple of seasons ago. Bowling Green seems to have that one really embarrassing game on a P5 in them every year. I mean, this year it was Georgia Tech. But somebody pointed out that actually sounds like the most Quick Lane Bowl matchup ever. Apparently they've never – it sounded like somebody thought, like, haven't they played this game before? No, Bowling Green and Minnesota have never played in the Quick Lane Bowl against each other. But it just sounds so perfect for that particular game. I don't know. Ski Mask Smurfy, what is there? By the way, if you're up here, if you want to just say which bowl you're really into it this weekend, or maybe in a bowl season, I'd love to hear that too.
Oh, I was gonna say the worst bowl I could figure to play in is it's probably the Idaho Famous Potatoes Bowl because you don't want to be in up in Idaho in the middle of the winter. That just sounds harsh.
Yeah, you're right. It isn't New York. At least if you're sent to the Pinstripe Bowl, you're in New York City, which for some of the young men, that's going to be a fun place to be. And same with Boston. I don't know exactly what the bowl entertainment is there. Do they put them on the Freedom Trail, or do they I took my little kids to the Boston Tea Party Museum, where you pretend to you get to throw tea into the harbor, but it's attached by like a cable, so you can pull it right back up and hand it to the next person to throw the tea into the harbor. It's super dorky, very overpriced, but it's interesting and cute, and people are in character talking to you like not ye old England, but close enough. But Ski Master Murphy, which bowl are you looking forward to this weekend?
This weekend, I would say I'm gonna have to go with the Mexico Cure Bowl. Or is it avocados from Mexico Cure Bowl?
Yeah, avocados. I think you blurred the New Mexico Bowl and the Cure Bowl together.
Yeah, the Cure Bowl. The Cure Bowl. The name's too long. Yeah, App State versus Miami, Ohio. Just because I know App State is it has to be chaos. That's the only way they know how to play. So I know there's going to be entertainment somewhere.
Oh, absolutely. I like that one. Let's see here. Nate, I see. I'll get to all of you guys with your hands up. Nate, which one are you looking forward to?
I think the one I'm looking forward to is Cal and Texas Tech. I think that one could get frisky. That'll be an interesting one to watch this weekend. And then overall, later on, but are there many opt-outs? I feel like the Notre Dame Oregon State game, that should be an interesting one to watch.
It'll be very curious because that one has a lot of opt-outs. So I'm very curious to see the type of teams we see against each other. And of course, Oregon State doesn't even have their head coach. So that one is going to be an interesting one to see for sure. Let's see here. John, RJ, and then Mac.
I was just say, I think for the Saturday, I have to agree with Ski Mask. I think Miami Ohio has 11 wins. That's incredible. I mean, I don't know if I can ever remember a time where Miami Ohio had won 11 games going into its bowl game. So I think I'm really looking forward to that. To answer my own question, because I think it's only fair because I made you try to answer it. I really think the Quick Lane Bowl, I think it's the worst one. I can't imagine working, getting up at 4 a.m., doing workouts, playing your butt off, like putting all this sacrifice and dedication, having an incredible season, and then like your coach coming in and be like, all right, you guys, we're gonna spend Christmas in Detroit, and this being ultimately let down by the idea of you could be going anywhere warm in the country, and you got the one you got the very few chance of getting sent to the middle of Michigan in December. So I feel like it's had to put my answer out there too.
Awesome. RJ, what's on which give us your thoughts?
Yeah, for the bowl game, I wouldn't want to be sent to. It's the Bahamas Bowl this specific year because it's not in the Bahamas.
Charlotte. Yeah.
Like,
oh, come on, man.
Like, no disrespect to Charlotte, but do you understand how mad I would be if I played my way into the Bahamas Bowl and instead I have to go to Charlotte? Nah, I'd be mad. But in terms of,
I mean, and for those who don't know, the Bahamas Bowl has a funny kind of setup there in the sense that all the conference, all the teams, it's the Conference USA, they actually, the NCAA gives them a grant and they apply so every player on every team gets a passport, which they might not normally get, just in case they're the team at the end of the season that gets sent to the Bahamas Bowl. So it's kind of a cool thing. But yeah, no, because apparently they're redoing that stadium for the next couple of years. It's going to be in Charlotte, and it's the famous Toastery Bowl, which I guess is the name of a local restaurant chain.
Yep. Charlotte, the Bahamas of the United States.
As somebody pointed out, it creates an interesting quirk because North Carolina, of course, after Pearl Harbor, they moved the Rose Bowl there to Duke Stadium. So it's now hosted like a Bahamas Bowl, a Rose Bowl. There was one other one that somebody threw in there too, but it's going to end up being a future trivia question. Which state has hosted, the Duke's Mayo Bowl as well as the Rose Bowl as well as the Bahamas Bowl? And now you all know it's North Carolina. By the way, before I forget, only because someone brought it up. So the last time the Miami of Ohio did do that well was when Brent Roethlisberger was their quarterback, and they went 13-1 and finished the season ranked number 10 in 2003. They only lost the opener at Iowa, and then they just went through the rest of their season. They beat Northwestern, and then they beat a Conference USA Louisville in the GMAC Bowl in Mobile at the end of the season. But that was the one that was the last time Miami of Ohio had a season even close to this one.
RJ. Yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I'm actually going to the Toastery Bowl Monday. That's why I interrupted. Actually, I could give you a lovely first-person experience review when I'm back on this next Tuesday. So
can't wait to hear about it.
Stickos Committee, when you hear this back, just know we will have boots on the ground. Please get in touch with this man.
Is Biff Poggi going to be there? Is he just going to be in the audience watching because he thinks his team should have been, because it's in a stadium? That would be hilarious.
Oh, what do you mean? It's portal season. Biff going to be there recruiting.
Oh, I love that. And it's so funny too. Now the famous Toastery Bowl keeps me thinking of a Pop-Tart Bowl, and because you get to eat that mascot, or however they're doing that at the end of the game. The winning team gets to take a bite out of the mascot. I still don't know. I still think it's apparently a Pop-Tart. It needs to be a Pop-Tart filled with some kind of red filling, and it needs to scream for people to stop as they're eating it. And I want to see players, especially if it's a visiting team in white jerseys, I want to see it leaking this red stuff, so we get all these players afterwards that look like they just came out of a slasher film. But that's just me. Maybe I have weird views on Pop-Tarts. But Mac, what's on your mind?
Before I go, one thing.
The
whole game that I am most excited for, I need to make sure this stat gets across the airwaves. The last time Cal played a Texas team, and possibly Cal's last bowl game, they threw 6 interceptions. Cal was on their third-string quarterback. We might get 7.
Oh my goodness! Yeah, Texas Tech has been a disappointing season, but still, that they still got talent on that team for sure. Mac, what are your thoughts on this question?
Yes, so the bowl I'm actually looking forward to this weekend is Howard and FAMU. Just due to the fact that I got family that went to FAMU, but it's mixed for me because Howard's head coach was Larry Scott, who was actually a defensive coach at USF. So kind of torn between that. And then as far as the bowl that I wouldn't want to go to, the Avocados from Mexico Bowl, just due to the fact that I would want to play a bowl game in my rival stadium.
Oh, that's a great one. I like that. You see, and that's the thing, USC fans can't complain about that because the Rose Bowl is technically, UCLA kind of sidestepped everything and no, we're calling this our home stadium. So they're the one school that doesn't quite get as upset about it. But that's a good one. I like that. And the Celebration Bowl, I can't believe I forgot about it. That's always a good game. That's going to be on ABC at noon Eastern also this Saturday. So be sure. That's always a great way to kick off bowl season in general. So looking forward to that one, Howard and FAMU for sure. Ski Mask Smurf. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Go Bison. Ski Master Murphy, I see your hand up, and then I'm going to slowly wrap us up.
Okay, sorry. So a crazy idea just popped into my head while we were mentioning the Bahamas Bowl. What if like an alternative once the 12-team playoff happens is like if someone sets up a bowl like a mini playoff and just call it an invitational with like 8 teams, just in a place where the players actually want to go, like the Bahamas, something that seems like a crazy alternative, but it could work. Sort of like how, well, not how the NIT works with the NCAA tournament because they're not in good locations, but just set up something alternatively that'll have another group of good teams, but put it in a place where it's like, no, we want to be there.
The Cancun Invitational or something like that. No, and it's kind of interesting because we've had there's always been this kind of outside discussion of should there be a G5 playoff or should there be some kind of version of that, like an NIT version of a playoff. My only thought is the each extra game, and that I wonder if we'll see teams revert back to the whole reason they didn't want a playoff, an additional game was the idea of extra chances for injuries, extra chances for X. And what are we really? Imagine having a crucial player you lose totally over a game that wasn't necessarily all that important. I could see that pushback, but I always think if the money's there, and especially if they allowed a tournament for that other 7, I don't know apart for the 12-team tournament. I don't know what would prevent another one from forming. I just think you'd get all the questions over television, over the money. Will the money be there? Will the 12-team playoff still siphon off the majority of interest? I'm not sure it'll be possible for a lot of reasons. I don't know if it would be feasible, but it's absolutely fascinating to think about it. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. We've been going for about an hour and 20 minutes. It's been a bit of a tiring day for me. I actually went into this and I'm like, my brain is fried. Like, now I'm going to, but at least I get to talk about college football. And it's so funny. You guys give me life. I feel like so much more energetic after talking to you all. And I'll stay up now for 2 hours just because I'm stupid and I think it's a good idea. And I'll read like Wikipedia articles about college football or something. But I just wanted to take a second to thank all of you who joined us, either in the audience or here on the stage. Give us your thoughts. Tuesday nights are when we always enjoy talking to you, 10 p.m. Eastern here on Twitter Space, X Space, however you want to say it. My name is Bobak Ha'Eri. I'm your host. This is going to automatically turn into a recording as soon as it's done here on X, but also we'll eventually get this up to wherever you get your podcast if you want to hear it as our CFB Talk. If you want to get more into the playoffs, I was hired by a media group to take over a spot, and I do the College Football Survivor Show. I'll just mention that occasionally. I do that with CBS Sports Shehan Jayaraja, where we just focus on playoff teams. Just throw that out there. But regardless, I hope you all have a great night. I can't wait to talk to you all next week after the first round of bowls. And a reminder, again, it's going to be way busier next season around this time because we're going to be talking about the first round of playoff games that would be coming up this weekend next year. So there's going to be literally no calm before the storm. It's going to be, I've heard a lot of sports media complain about it, but it's going to be exciting for fans. It's going to be just more of a dense schedule and more interesting discussions about which teams are going to be home teams for that first round and which teams are going to be the visitors and all that stuff. Can't wait for it. But on behalf of all of us, I hope you all have a great night. Now I'm going to hang up and listen.